Void Runners. Chapter 1. Echelon. Clearance granted, Emerald. The automated traffic control of Draven buzzed over the comms, cutting sharply through the melancholy swell of the cello. Proceed to Docking Bay 414, Echelon Apex Port. Maintain designated speed. Finn reached forward and killed the music with a sharp flick of a heavy toggle switch. The sudden silence in the cockpit was heavy, filled only by the low, vibrating hum of the sublight engines. He threaded the Emerald through the chaos of glittering orbital lanes, jaw clenched tight. Draven's capital, Echelon, sprawled below, a suffocating metropolis swallowing continents in plasteel, neon, and smog. As the Emerald broke through the planet's thick, smog-choked atmosphere, Echelon Apex Port rose up to meet him. It was a staggering monument to corporate wealth and endless logistics. Massive, blocky transport ships, freighters the size of small cities, hung in the air on anti-gravity repulsors, waiting their turn to gorge themselves on cargo. Flying past them, Finn felt like he was piloting a child's toy, but he didn't care. The Emerald was fast, heavily shielded, and she was entirely his own. He touched down gently in Bay 414, the landing struts locking onto the grease-stained Duracrete with a heavy, metallic clank. Finn didn't bother with a bag. He shrugged on his battered leather jacket, checked the weight of his custom blaster out of deep space habit, and strode down the loading ramp. To his right, Bay 413 sat empty. He'd reserved it for his brother's hulking cargo ship, the Silly Goose. The air outside the ship hit him like a physical blow. It was hot, thick with the smell of burning promethium fuel and the pressed, sweating mass of 10 million people. The roar of the port was deafening. Screaming engines, shouting dock workers, and the relentless, robotic drone of cargo loaders. Finn yanked up his collar and marched toward the automated taxi rank beyond the port gates. He slid into the back of a hovering, dented yellow cab. The synthetic voice of the onboard computer immediately chirped, "State your destination, citizen." "Central Morgue, Sector 4, Finn rasped. The cab lurched forward, merging smoothly into a chaotic, multi-level river of flying traffic that wound its way through the towering skyscrapers of Echelon. Finn leaned his head against the scratched plasteel, watching neon blur past. Each return to Draven made the city feel more suffocating. The towers taller, the air heavier, his skin crawled. All he wanted was to find his brother, light up the Emerald's engines, and escape to the silent comfort of the void. He hated this city now, but once he hadn't. He and Leon hadn't been born in the neon sprawl of Echelon. They had grown up a few days' travel from here, on a dying little rock called Kiln. For nearly a century, Kiln had been the industrial powerhouse of the Outer Rim, churning out raw ore to build the glittering towers of Draven. But the corporations had stripped the planet bare, sucked the marrow from the stone, and abandoned it. Finn and Leon had spent their childhoods running wild through the vast bone pit. It was a dry, almost desert-like expanse of dust and rust that had once housed thousands of mining employees. By the time Finn was a boy, there were fewer than 100 families left, spread out over miles of empty, scarred earth. A few hardy, scrubby plants had begun to push their way back through the cracked bedrock, but the massive, rusted skeletons of the old mining rigs still dominated the horizon. It was bleak, poor, and unforgiving. But it was freedom. When Finn was 13 and Leon 15, their father had finally scraped together enough credits and called in enough favors to land a low-level maintenance job on Draven. Moving to Echelon had felt like stepping into a dream. For the first 2 years, the brothers had been mesmerized by the endless lights, the sheer volume of people, and the impossible scale of the capital. But the novelty had worn off quickly. The dream soured. The sprawling metropolis wasn't a playground. It was a cage. The claustrophobia of living stacked atop millions of strangers, never seeing the horizon, never feeling a breeze that didn't smell of exhaust, had slowly broken their spirits. It was the reason they had pooled all their credit 10 years ago to start Void Runners. They just wanted out. And now, Leon would never leave. The automated cab jolted to a halt, the repulsor engines whining as it settled onto a rain-slicked landing pad in Sector 4. Destination reached, the synthetic voice chirped. Fare is 42 credits. Finn tapped his wrist comm against the payment scanner and stepped out into the drizzling, neon-lit gloom. The central morgue was a squat, brutalist block of gray ferrocrete, entirely lacking the glittering corporate advertisements that plastered the rest of the city. Finn pushed through the heavy glass doors, the sterile, biting scent of chemical antiseptic instantly clearing the smog from his lungs. The waiting room glared with harsh light, empty except for a bored clerk behind thick security glass. Finn walked up to the counter. "I'm here for a pickup. Leon Crow." The clerk barely looked up from his datapad, his fingers dancing lazily across the glowing screen. "Crow Leon, right. Industrial accident in Sector 7. He tapped a few keys, bringing up a digital file. Cargo loader malfunction. Crushed in the lower spine and thorax. Instantaneous." Finn froze. The dull ache of grief he'd carried for days sharpened into a cold, piercing clarity. "Say that again," Finn said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. The clerk finally looked up, blinking in surprise at the sheer intensity radiating from the man in the worn leather jacket. Industrial accident. Cargo loader malfunction. The official report says a Class 4 heavy lifter blew a hydraulic seal and dropped a shipping container on him. Nasty way to go, but the port authorities ruled it an accidental... My brother," Finn interrupted, leaning his forearms heavily against the security glass, his dark eyes boring into the clerk, "has been running deep space freight for a decade. He could strip and rebuild a Class 4 heavy lifter blindfolded in zero gravity. He didn't stand under unsecured cargo." The clerk shifted uncomfortably, intimidated by the raw, barely suppressed violence radiating from the pilot. "Look, buddy, I just read the coroner's report. I didn't write it. Sector 7 Port Authority signed off on it. Accidental death. Do you want to process the release forms to claim the remains now, or..." Finn stared through the glass, his jaw clenching so hard his teeth ached. He couldn't face it. Not yet. The idea of stepping into that sterile, icy room and seeing Leon's broken body, the man who taught him to fly, to fight, to survive, made Finn's stomach twist. He needed answers first. He needed to see for himself. "Keep him on ice," Finn rasped, pushing himself away from the counter. He turned his back on the clerk, pulling the collar of his leather jacket up against the chill of the morgue. "I'll be back for him." He shoved through the glass doors, swallowed by Echelon's drizzling, neon-lit gloom. He skipped the cabs. They left digital trails, and if someone had arranged a fatal accident for a veteran pilot, Finn wasn't about to advertise that the victim's brother was poking around. Instead, he trudged 2 blocks through oppressive rain to the nearest transit hub, buying a cheap, anonymous token for the anti-grav tube. The train was a battered metal tube, hovering on flickering repulsors and crammed with weary workers, corporate drones, and the desperate. Finn grabbed a strap at the back, ignoring the stink of damp clothes and cheap tobacco as the doors hissed shut. The journey was agonizingly slow, The train lurched through the sprawling metropolis, making dozens of stops, diving deeper and deeper into the towering, claustrophobic canyons of Echelon. As they descended, the glittering corporate advertisements and sleek glass towers gave way to rusted ferrocrete, flickering sodium lights, and the heavy, choking smog of heavy industry. It took over an hour to reach Sector 7. When the doors finally hissed open, Finn stepped out onto a cracked plasteel platform. The air here was noticeably worse than at the spaceport. It tasted like copper and burned oil catching in the back of his throat. Sector 7 wasn't a place people went to for fun. It sat on the very ragged edge of Echelon's oldest industrial zone, a maze of automated factories, towering coolant towers, and neglected cargo hubs. Bordering the district was a wide, sluggish river, a dark, slow-flowing artery of chemical runoff and pollution that caught the sickly yellow glare of the street lamps like an oil slick. Finn pulled his jacket tight, his hand resting casually near the customized blaster at his hip. The few people out on the streets here walked quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact. He checked the coroner's report he had downloaded to his wristcom. Loading dock 44B. He navigated the maze of rusted shipping containers and towering automated cranes, the heavy mechanical thud of the nearby factories vibrating through the soles of his boots. The deeper he walked into the loading docks, the quieter it got. Dock 44B was located near the polluted river, shrouded in deep shadows cast by a towering, defunct coolant tower. The area was cordoned off by a few flimsy strips of yellow hazard tape bearing the faded insignia of the Echelon Port Authority. Finn ducked under the tape, his boots crunching on loose gravel. The scene of the accident hadn't been cleaned up. A massive, rusted metal shipping container sat squarely in the center of the loading pad. The durasteel plating on the side was warped, and a dark, terrifying stain painted the ferrocrete beneath one corner. Suspended high above it in the gloom was the Class 4 heavy lifter crane that had supposedly failed. Finn crept closer, eyes sweeping the shadows. He ignored the stain, focusing instead on the crane overhead. Something felt wrong. The Class 4 lifters were beasts of pure, brutal engineering. They were built to hoist hundreds of tons of ore in a single lift, relying on thick, reinforced hydraulic pistons. Even in a neglected district like Sector 7, the Port Authority didn't mess around with maintenance on equipment that size. A catastrophic failure required a massive, explosive rupture of the main seals. Finn seized the rusted ladder bolted to the dock wall and started to climb. The freezing, polluted mist coming off the dark river clung to the metal rungs, making them slick under his calloused hands. He hauled himself up 30 feet into the air, swinging over the safety railing onto the narrow gantry that ran alongside the crane's massive primary arm. He unclipped a high-powered flashlight from his belt, its harsh white beam slicing through the sodium gloom. He didn't have to look hard to find the point of failure. The primary hydraulic coupling, the massive joint that held the pressure for the lifting arm, had completely sheared off. Thick, black hydraulic fluid was still dripping sluggishly from the broken seal, pooling on the grated walkway beneath his boots. Finn knelt by the broken coupling, smearing away grease with his thumb and shining the flashlight onto the shattered metal. His jaw tightened. The anger simmering in his chest for days crystallized into cold, focused fury. The coupling didn't belong to this crane. The lifting arm itself was heavily used, its yellow paint chipped and faded, but the durasteel was solid and relatively clean. The sheared coupling, however, was a rusted, pitted, crumbling mess. The metal was flaking away at the edges, completely corroded by years of exposure. It looked like it had been salvaged from the bottom of a scrap heap on a dead mining colony. Finn ran his finger along the sheer line where the metal had snapped. It was clean. Too clean. Sloppy work, Finn muttered into the empty gantry. It hadn't been an accident. Someone had deliberately swapped out the functioning hydraulic coupling for this rusted piece of junk after the container had fallen. They had dropped tons of Durasteel directly onto his brother, and then staged the scene to look like a mechanical failure. The Port Authority inspectors either hadn't looked closely enough, or, more likely in a corrupt hole like Sector 7, they had been paid to look the other way. But why? And who? Leon wasn't a smuggler. He ran the same legitimate courier business Finn did. He hauled basic supplies, water purifiers, and the occasional data drive for corporate clients too cheap to hire a secure transport. He didn't gamble, he didn't run spice, and he certainly didn't cross the syndicates that ran the Echelon underworld. He was a cautious, meticulous pilot who wanted nothing more than to earn his credits and fly in peace. Why drop a shipping container on a man who had no enemies? Finn rose slowly, snapping off his flashlight and hooking it to his belt. He peered through the grating at the dented container lurking in the shadows below. If the scene had been staged, which company was having its cargo moved at the time? And were they picking up or dropping off? It might have no bearing on the event, but then again, it might. He climbed down the slick ladder, dropping the last few feet to cracked ferrocrete. He approached the massive Durasteel box, ignoring the dark stain by his boots. He didn't try to open the heavy double doors at the front. Instead, Finn pulled his high-powered flashlight again, walking around the warped side of the massive metal crate. Every shipping container moving through a legitimate port in Echelon had to be registered, stamped with a serial code, and tagged with a corporate ownership log. If someone was paying off the Port Authority to fake a coroner's report, they might have scrubbed the digital manifest, but the physical stamp would be stamped right into the Durasteel. Finn swept the beam of light across the rusted, corrugated metal. He found the ownership plate welded near the top corner. It was heavily scored and partially melted, as if someone had taken a plasma torch to it in a hurry to obscure the registration barcode. But they had been sloppy. The searing heat of the torch hadn't completely destroyed the raised, stamped lettering of the corporate logo beneath the barcode. Finn squinted, rubbing away a layer of black soot and river grime with his thumb. The faint, unmistakable silhouette of a stylized, geometric falcon emerged in the harsh white light. Athelgard Corporation. Finn stared at the logo, a cold chill settling deep into his stomach that had nothing to do with the freezing, polluted mist coming off the river. Athelgard Corporation didn't deal in water purifiers or bulk grain shipments. They were one of the largest, most secretive biotechnology firms in the entire solar system. They built experimental medical tech, advanced cybernetics, and military-grade augmentations, operating from highly secure, pristine orbital platforms above Draven. They did not do business in the rusted, rotting shadow of Sector 7, and they certainly didn't hire independent, small-time couriers like Leon to haul their cargo. Finn stepped back, hand dropping instinctively to his heavy blaster. If Leon had somehow gotten tangled up with Athelgard cargo, this wasn't just a random mugging gone wrong. He had stumbled into something massive, something corporate, something worth killing a man and paying off an entire sector's authority to cover up. He clicked off the flashlight, plunging the loading pad back into the deep, flickering sodium gloom of the coolant tower's shadow. His first instinct, honed by years of dealing with bureaucratic headaches across a dozen star systems, was to march straight into the Sector 7 Port Authority office and demand the manifest from the dockmaster. But the cold logic of the void quickly snuffed that impulse out. If anyone in Sector 7 was likely to be corrupted and absolutely untrustworthy, it was the dockmaster. A heavy lifter crane didn't get a rusted coupling swapped out, and a coroner's report didn't get rubber stamped as an accident without the dockmaster's explicit approval. Walking into his office and asking questions about a dead courier and an Athelgard shipping container would be a foolish, suicidal move. It would instantly paint a massive target on his back. He didn't want to draw any attention to himself. Not yet. He had to think about this. Finn pulled the collar of his worn leather jacket up against the freezing, chemical-tasting drizzle blowing off the polluted river. He was already getting tired. The 3-day flight from Wynn, the crushing grief of the morgue, and the adrenaline of his discovery were beginning to take a heavy toll on his focus. He needed to rest, and he needed a secure connection to the local extranet to run a silent search on Athelgard Corp's recent activities in Echelon. Staying nearby in one of the cheap, anonymous capsule hotels that clustered around the edges of the industrial zone would be a better idea than taking the long, slow, anti-grav tube train all the way back to the Emerald. If he was going to dig into his brother's last run, he needed to be close to the docks when the morning shift started. Finn turned from the ruined crane and blood-stained container, slipping quietly beneath the yellow tape. He walked quickly away from loading dock 44B, keeping to the deepest shadows of the towering, automated factories. The heavy, rhythmic thud of the machinery masked the sound of his boots on the cracked ferrocrete. 10 minutes later, he found a crumbling, neon-lit sign buzzing violently in the smog. The rusted anchor, capsules and stimcaf, no questions asked. It was exactly the kind of filthy, unregulated dive Finn was looking for. He pushed through the heavy plasteel doors, the smell of cheap synthetic coffee and ozone washing over him. The lobby was narrow and dimly lit, lined with rows of stacked, hexagonal sleeping pods that looked more like morgue drawers than beds. A bored, heavily augmented clerk with a glowing, cybernetic eye didn't even look up from his holoscreen as Finn approached the counter. One night. Lower level. Finn rasped, dropping a physical, untraceable credit chip onto the scratched plasteel surface. The clerk palmed the chip and silently slid a small plastic keycard across the counter. Pod 114. Showers are broken. Don't smoke in the tube unless you want the fire suppression foam to drown you. Finn took the card and walked down the narrow, buzzing corridor. He found Pod 114, swiped the card, and crawled into the cramped, windowless space. The capsule was barely large enough for him to sit up in, smelling faintly of harsh chemical cleaner and old sweat, but the door locked securely behind him with a heavy, magnetic thud. He pulled his leather jacket off, setting his heavy blaster on the thin, synthetic mattress right beside his pillow. He lay back, staring up at the low, gray ceiling of the pod. The low hum of the capsule's ventilation system sounded entirely too much like the life support scrubbers on the Emerald, and for a moment, the crushing weight of his brother's death threatened to drown him. Leon was gone, and whoever had killed him was hiding behind a wall of corporate Durasteel and paid-off dockmasters. Finn reached over, tapping a sequence into the cracked datapad mounted on the capsule's wall. The screen flickered to life, bathing his tired, unshaven face in a pale blue glow. He had a long night of encrypted slicing ahead of him. Tomorrow, he was going to find out exactly what Leon had been hauling for Athelgard.